Well, hey there, YouTube. I have another lawnmower find. Found this one this morning. It's an older one. It's a Craftsman, 22-inch. Has a Tecumseh 6-horsepower engine on it. I've taken a real quick initial look at it. When I found it, it was raining and it was covered in rain. There's probably water in the gas. The air filter was soaking wet, so I took it off to let it dry. I figured it probably wouldn't run with that on it. It had little to no oil showing on the dipstick. I did check it after I found it for compression, and it does have compression. Amazingly. So today we're going to try to get it to stay running, and it has a couple other issues I'll show you here. You can probably see there in the front the wheels are kind of bent and out of place. That one wheel bracket is moving around, so we'll take a look there, see if we can tighten that down. And then one small minor issue in the back. This metal bar, well, I'm not sure what the purpose of it is, if it just holds the handlebars there. At any rate, that metal bar is broken on this side. It's okay here, but we will probably either fix it or remove it. So I've added oil to it. I have not checked the spark plug yet. We'll check that later. It has a full tank of gas, but I suspect the gas is no good since it's sat out in the rain. I'll just show you what it does before we tear into it. A little carb cleaner in it. So it starts and dies, which is your classic carburetor issue. So it actually stayed running. That's the first time it's done that. But it still sounds like it's running too lean. I have a brand new carburetor. I think I'm going to put it on. The primer bulb on this one is starting to crack. So since you can buy a brand new carburetor for about the same price as a primer on the internet, I'm just going to put a brand new carburetor on it. And then you probably noticed when I pulled the rope that the recoil, the shroud, it looks like it's probably missing a couple bolts. Since this is loose, I think one of the first things I'll do is take off the gas tank and the recoil. For sure the gas tank. It's held on by 3 bolts on the top here. They are 5/16. And you will have to remove the dipstick in order to slide this up and out of the way. So we will do that. All 3 bolts are out. And we'll remove the dipstick. This slides up and out. And I'll put the dipstick back in so we don't get contaminants in there. There is the back of the recoil, very oily. This bolt was almost completely out. Hopefully the holes aren't stripped. But this is so oily, I think I'm going to take it off and see if it needs to be cleaned off any. To remove the recoil on a Tecumseh, there's 2 bolts in the front, 5/16. 2 in the back you can hardly see because of all the dirt. They are 3/8. And then there's one here on the dipstick that's also filthy. And I believe it is 5/16. We need to get all those out. All of the bolts are out. Let's take a closer look here. So it looks to me like the source of all the oil is from the oil breather. It's not seating in there. It's not seating in there as tightly as it should. So we're going to try something here. Here's the Toro with the Tecumseh engine that knocks. And this oil breather appears to not be so loose. So in order to get that out, we're going to have to pop off the flywheel on both engines. It takes a 3/4 nut. We need to get a 3/4 socket. And then we'll try to pop them both off. And we got the starter cup and the nut off both engines. Let's pop off these flywheels. So we're going to try to pop this flywheel off of this Toro. I have a pry bar underneath. I'm going to pry up at the same time that I hit the top of the crankshaft with a hammer. And I did thread the nut back on part way onto the crankshaft. So let's see if it pops off. And 2 more hits with the hammer after I turned the camera off and it popped off. There we go. This is the oil breather I'm going to try to salvage and swap and put on the green Craftsman. Now we need to pop off the flywheel on the Craftsman. And we got the flywheel off of the green Craftsman. Same way we did the Toro. Now let's swap that oil breather. To remove the oil breather, disconnect it there from that tube that goes to the carburetor. And normally you want to be careful not to get any junk, dirt, oil down in the crankcase. This is the Toro. This engine knocks, so it's no good. So I'm not as concerned about keeping the inside of this engine clean. But I will take a flathead screwdriver and carefully, without tearing or damaging anything, try to pry this up. And there we go. Our new used oil breather from the Toro is now on the Craftsman, and you can see there we don't have any play like we used to. So hopefully that took care of the oil. I think I'm going to turn on a hose and clean off all this oil and debris before we put the flywheel back on. There's our engine after I put the hose on it. I did also put a paper towel. We're going to replace the carburetor, but I still put a paper towel in there to keep too much water from getting in the intake. So it's clean. Let's put it back together. Before we put it all back together, I'll give my dad credit for this. Let's swap the carburetor. We'll have a little bit more wiggle room in here for the linkage and everything if we don't have the flywheel on. So let's put our brand new carburetor on. First thing, we're going to have to remove the muffler. It's held on by 2 bolts. They are 7/16. Muffler is off. Now to remove the carburetor, there are 2 bolts, one in the back, one in the front, with a nut on the back, and they are 3/8. We'll get those out. So the bolt is a 3/8, the nut on the back is a 7/16. Just an FYI. Back one is out. And the front one is out. Now we need to disconnect the oil breather tube and the linkage and remove the fuel line. So we'll do that. We have disconnected the old carburetor from the gas tank and the fuel line. Here is our brand new aftermarket carburetor. You'll notice one thing we do need to transplant. We need to transplant the plastic air filter housing. It's held on by 2 screws, either Phillips or I like to use a 1/4-inch socket. We need to get that moved over onto our new carburetor. And our pretty brand new carburetor now has the air filter housing mounted onto it. Now we'll put it back on the lawnmower. So first thing, let's reattach the governor linkage. It goes into the farther hole, the one that's farther away from the governor. And let's stick the bolts back in. The trickier one is the back one because there's not much room to get your fingers in there. So I like to try to do that one first. At least get it started. Okay, I got a couple threads on there. And then we'll put the front bolt back in. So we'll get that tightened down. It's just a reverse of how we took it off. The brand new carburetor is back on, and I reconnected our oil breather tube. Now let's get the muffler back on. Our muffler is back on. 2 bolts, 7/16. Let's get the flywheel back on. Keyway is back on the crankshaft. And now the flywheel is back on. Now we need to put the starter cup and the nut back on. Flywheel, starter cup, and nut is back on. Now let's put the recoil back on. The recoil is back on. 2 bolts in the front, 5/16. 2 bolts in the back, 3/8. 1 bolt holding on the dipstick, 5/16. Now let's get the gas tank hooked back up to the carburetor and mounted back on the mower. I poured a little bit of the gas that was in the tank into this container. It doesn't look bad. I don't see any water, I don't see any dirt, and it doesn't smell bad. So I'm going to try to run this with the gas that's in it. Fuel line and gas tank are back on. 3 screws, 3 bolts, 5/16. We'll get them tightened down. Let's take a look at this very old, rusty looking Champion spark plug. It's seen better days. I think it's been in this engine for a while. I have a brand new one, RJ19LM. I'll throw it in. Okay, it's all back together. We even put the air filter back on. Connect the spark plug. Give it some prime. Sounds pretty good for being thrown away. I think this engine's going to be alright. I didn't see it smoking. I didn't smell any oil burning, which is surprising because it had hardly any oil in it when I first found it. So let's see real quick here what the issue is with these front wheels. Now that we fixed the engine, and we know it's worth spending a little time on the wheels, let's see what's going on. So here's the mower. This is the right front wheel. This is the hole where the bolt for the front wheel goes in, and then this is a little bracket to help it from bouncing around too much. A little nub on the wheel mounting goes in that hole. On the other side, we have a big old hole in the deck. This right up here is where that hole for the bracket should be. So I'm going to try some washers and JB Weld and see if we can just kind of get that to set in there more permanently. So here is my attempted repair on the wheel mounting on the deck. I put the bolt and the nut and the washer back on. It's about as tight as it'll get. And I covered it with JB Weld. Tried to cover the entire hole that was in there. And I'll show you what I did on the other side. So I stuck a little bit of JB Weld on the outside there by the wheel bracket. I have it held on temporarily with this bungee cord just to hold it in place so it can set up and dry real hard. And I'll check on it probably tomorrow or the day after, see what happened. So I think that will conclude today's work on the Craftsman. I'll let that wheel bracket set up and dry, and hopefully it'll stay in place. Thanks for watching.